Football for me, it means people. Everyone who's involved for the right reasons. They want to play because they love the game, they want to be involved, and it brings connection between everyone, whether it's standing on the sides, whether it's in the crowd, just watching and not playing.
And with football being for everyone, whether you're a coach, a player, an aspiring player for the future, someone seeking a scholarship, a teacher, a youth worker, a professional, a volunteer, someone seeking to get involved in the game, a volunteer parent, whether they're reflecting on their journey and how they can understand their grassroots team, an aspiring academy coach yourself, no matter what and no matter where you're listening, this podcast is really for you. On the Reflective Coach podcast, there are so many wonderful guests that feature on a podcast, whether this is former professionals, current professionals, and professionals of all backgrounds within the Coaching Insight series that really inspire, understand, support, and are reflective amongst this journey as they share their own insights, experiences, their own journey, their own reflections, strategies, insights, and other stories into the Reflective Coach podcast. Each week features a new guest, and each new guest brings something new to the podcast. I've been so lucky to have so many wonderful guests on, and you can really listen to all the episodes on Spotify, YouTube, and Podcast Addict, with continuous updates on Twitter and LinkedIn. By subscribing, commenting, following, engaging with all the posts amongst social media, you can really keep up to date with all the episodes.
Even the mid-sized ones, it's all about the systems you have in place. I think if you don't have proper systems, kids are going to fall through the cracks. So that's everything from how you database them, how you organize that data, how anyone on our staff can kind of open up our database and see where we're at with a kid, how many phone calls, notes, all that stuff. Because, you're looking across 3 or 4 classes, it's upwards of over close to maybe 1,000 kids over 4 classes. Mm-hmm. And just to have that, you can't have that in your head at all times. So we've kind of talked a little bit about the work-life balance, and you mentioned it. If you're not taking time for yourself and you're not, refilling, whichever way you look at it, refilling or emptying your cup you're not going to be able to do quality work either. It's got to be something that brings you joy, that brings, that kind of recharges your battery. And a lot of us in this game, it is the work, it is the game, but there's got to be something outside of that as well. And then you can quickly get burned out if you do not. And I volunteer myself. It's something I've done in the past as far as going through phases of like working 100 miles an hour, and then a week later you're like, I can't even think or function. So it has to be. So I've started now picking out, what are the things I want to do throughout the week. Those putting yourself almost as the priority. Yeah, man, I'm doing well. Yourself?
Yeah, good. Nice to see you.
Nice seeing you as well. Good to meet you in person. Put a face to the name.
Absolutely. It's been great to be chatting. Great to get that background and great to get it organised. So I really appreciate that. So it's great. So every time I get a coach on, I love what they have in the background, by the way. And there's been a few coaches who had different flags on in the background, but everyone adds a bit of recognition. So it's nice Barca one. The West Ham one's a bit questionable, but don't usually see Hammers fans in the US.
Typically, I get them at the stadiums. So if I've gone to see a pro game, if I saw Barca, saw West Ham, so I'm at their stadium, I got to get something. So a little bit of that.
I love that though. I think it's great. Adds to the office, and you get a bit of recognition and a bit of life behind everyone that comes with it as well, mate.
Yeah.
So, how's your day been so far? How's it been looking?
I've been good. Just got back from Tennessee this past weekend, a large club event down there from a recruiting standpoint, and just kind of getting stuff sorted out for the post-event emails and all the correspondence and whatnot. So, been a little busy, but it's the downtime, should I say, is on the horizon. Especially the dead period coming up for Division I, so I get to kind of maybe put the feet up for a few days or whatnot. So that's coming down the pike.
Much needed downtime. It's not often, I guess, spoken about in sports.
Yeah. It's few and far between, but even the downtime ends up being busy because you're like, ooh, I want to tweak this about how we're doing these things. You have the time to do it versus 100% putting the feet up, if you will. But it's that stuff's still rewarding in and of itself. Developing self development and whatnot.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with you. And even though I say like downtime, like just on a quick reflection point there, like being in work all day and then boom, evenings here. It's like, well, actually, I could have that downtime, but I'd much prefer to be sat here speaking to you and chatting about coaching, mate. So love it.
No, I appreciate your time, then, man. I really do.
No worries, and likewise, I'm glad that we could link up. And is it 12:30 where you're at now?
12:30. Yep.
Banging. So got that spot on, top tier coaching organisation. Look. But I have seen a lot on Twitter recently about a lot of recruitment in the States, and that seems to be so big in terms of how that comes across, that portrayal. So, how busy will you typically be over the recruitment period now in terms of preparation?
So there's a little bit of a window here for the recruitment, and it really depends on priorities of our team and budget and whatnot. We didn't go too hard in this window, but the next window is probably going to be towards beginning of February through the March or May time, March, April, May area. So that window we typically hit pretty hard. There's typically one of us out on the road at least 2 to 3 weekends a month. Just different locations. Sometimes it's smaller events. Sometimes it's as simple as maybe going to see a training session. And then also you still have the super large events that it takes 2 or 3 of us to kind of manage efficiently. So.
And in terms of that, then, so say you get like 100 players contact you to come and see them to take a look at their portfolios, etc. How many typical training sessions will you try and limit yourself to, or how many games? Because if you took in the case every event, every showcase, every sort of clip that you're watching, all the training sessions that you wanted to go to, that could be months and months of work in a matter of weeks with the long hours across 3 of you, or however many. Yeah. So do you try to limit yourself, or is it just sort of?
Yes and no. It's one of those things where it's like, okay, we can go to Louisville, it's 2 hours away, to watch these kids train. However, they're going to be at this tournament 2 weeks from now. Let's just see them there. So there's some of that give and take. But when you get to the larger tournaments or even the mid-sized ones, it's all about the systems you have in place. I think if you don't have proper systems, kids are going to fall through the cracks. So that's everything from how you database them, how you organize that data, how anyone on our staff can kind of open up our database and see where we're at with a kid, how many phone calls, notes, all that stuff. Because you're looking across 3 or 4 classes, it's upwards of close to maybe 1,000 kids over 4 classes, and just to have that, you can't have that in your head at all times. So it's the processes you have in place to make sure, hey, these are the people that have contacted us for this tournament. These are the people we've seen in the past that maybe not have contacted us for this specific tournament. Let's prioritize them to how we're going to catch them across a 3-day span. And if you have 1, 2, or 3 coaches, how you're going to be able to manage that. And sometimes you might have, there's a balance. Sometimes you might have 3 to 5 games in a time slot. You're not going to go to all 5. If you're trying to look for everything, you're going to end up seeing nothing. And that's a big thing we kind of preach, as far as like, if you're trying to do everything, you're trying to see everything, you're actually going to do or see nothing. So it's really putting in the quality time necessary to get quality and efficient work done, rather than how much can I do in such a short period of time.
I'm completely with you there, because that type of efficiency is really important. And I think it's a case in terms of the teams that I sort of work in. It's like, well, you actually have 125 hours available. That doesn't necessarily mean it's an endless amount of hours, because you have to work smart within that to make sure it maximizes, because we might have 125 hours, but we need to make sure that the opportunities are within there so we can make that impact, make sure we're tracking, we're logging, we're monitoring, and how we can certainly look at that in detail. So I think it's really good, as much as there's 3 of you available, and yes, you can look at footage, yes, you can, stay home, yes, you can make it logistically work to make sure you're not on the road and balance it between life and work, etc. But actually, if you're not manning the hours and planning them enough, you actually will end up losing those hours, and therefore losing those players in that process as well.
The prep work, I mean, two sides of the coin. The prep work is massive. I mean, it's probably 70% of the actual work of a given task, because if you do that, then you're able to carry out the other 30 more efficiently and more and have a better quality product at the end of it, versus like, hey, I'm going to dive into this and figure it out and just start going, and but then problems arise. You got to put out fires here, there, and the other. If you already thought about those fires and already planned for those the plan Bs, if you will, and you can kind of already kind of cut them off at the head before they even get there. On the other side of the coin, though, I think we've joked around, we've kind of talked a little bit about the work-life balance, and you mentioned it. If you're not taking time for yourself, and you're not refilling, whichever way you look at it, refilling or emptying your cup to you're not going to be able to do quality work either. It's got to be something that brings you joy, that brings that kind of recharges your battery. And a lot of us in this game, it is the work, it is the game, but there's got to be something outside of that as well that kind of refuel you, whether it's music or some type of games you like to play, or some type of our head coach likes to swim a lot. It's a big thing for him. That kind of he'll swim laps, and it's like a meditative process for him that he can like kind of switch off, but like still subconsciously be figuring things out. So you got to find something that kind of recharges your battery.
And when it comes to, say, to you, do you plan in your downtime in the week, or is it making sure that there is downtime available? And then what do you do typically in your downtime?
I used to not plan it. I used to not. And then you can quickly get burned out if you do not. And I volunteer myself. It's something I had done in the past, as far as going through phases of like working 100 miles an hour, and then a week later you're like, I can't even think or function. Like, so it has to be. So I've started now picking out, what are the things I want to do throughout the week. Those, putting yourself almost as the priority. Like, I'm taking this 2-hour block to, cook dinner with my family, sit down, have a nice dinner, relax, maybe watch a show together. And that is scheduled first in the week. And then the other things, if you do that, you start realizing you actually have a lot of time to get these things done. And you're still providing yourself that time for your recharging, if you will.
I love that. I think that's so important.
For me, you asked the things that I like to do. I like to cook. My wife and I enjoy cooking together, so that's a big thing we like to do. I love playing chess, but I'm not good at it. But I can never find people to want to play chess. I end up playing on the phone chess, and I really like music is a really big kind of recharger for me. It's something that my father and I kind of have bonded over forever. I like to dabble. I'll say dabble a little bit on guitar, not nothing too crazy, but just enough to kind of allow me to shut off.
They're all great hobbies, and I think, they're not too far away from how you can take it into soccer, for example. So, playing that chess, you could set up a chess club between your team, and then suddenly you got like a chess night every week, and therefore the players can start engaging. Or when you got like a campfire night, you take the team away, you could end up picking up the guitar and you're around the campfire chilling out as a team bonding session. Or you can cook for them, mate. Like, they're all sort of hobbies which are really beneficial to life, but also which you could utilize at any time. So, it sounds like a win-win situation, mate.
Yeah, and I think you're hitting on a lot of things that we call them software skills, like your ability to mentally regulate, your ability to emotionally regulate, and your lifestyle. We call them I'm sure you've heard of the 4 corner model.
Yeah.
And so we kind of look at it, and everything in coaching is stealing it from someone else and rebranding it as your own. But I'll give credit where credit's due. This 6-pillar idea is a Bill Beswick idea. So you have the software skills of mentally regulate, emotionally regulate, lifestyle, and then obviously the hardware skills are what everyone thinks of, the technical, tactical, and physical. But you have to be able to develop all 6 of those areas to really get the most out of an individual and help them kind of achieve things that they didn't think were possible. And so, you kind of hit it there where it's like, there was a time this season I can think of, there was a guitar and lobby of a hotel, and like 2 or 3 of the girls were play, and they were playing around, and you can't sit down with them and play a little bit back and forth, and creates kind of that bonding where now those players really feel a bit more comfortable with you, and that trust is built where some things from a mental regulation or emotional regulation, they might not have felt comfortable talking to you, because they might now they're more comfortable having those conversations, and you got to have, if you're focusing on those 6 and you're keeping the player's best interest in mind, that's where you can start seeing things flourish.
Absolutely. And there's so much within there which we can sort of unpack and touch upon, that in terms of those building those relationships, how to bring those players connected, and how that plays within a team environment and culture. And I know that we've delved into 12 minutes and taken the conversation away so naturally, which is great. And I love that, which is really beneficial. But before we get too further into the episode, I thought it'd be great to give you a bit of an introduction, background, who you are, where you're at, where you sort of come from, and how that has pieced together in terms of the work that you're doing now.
Yeah, I'm originally from West Virginia. I'm a proud home resident of that state. I've kind of been in coaching for about 14 years now. 12 to 13 of that has been in the college ranks. I've done some club work on the side, done some semi-professional work on the side as well. But from the college ranks is really where I've kind of sharpened my tools, if you will. And it's, so I've bounced around from, at all 3 divisions, 3, 2, and 1 across the East Coast, and now kind of exploring a bit more into the Midwest area. Primarily working with the Goalkeepers. I was a goalkeeper in college, and prior to college as well. But that's really where I kind of throw my energy into. But each staff is different. Each roles and responsibilities are different each staff. So there's a lot more to it than just the goalkeeping side of things. Obviously, the back office stuff that people don't see, and then some other aspects of soccer as well. And
so even though you've got that experience and you sort of bounced around a little bit, which gives you different experiences, perspectives, 100%. Insights, contacts, etc. When you started out, did you start out with a strategy and a vision that you wanted to achieve, or has it just pieced together and then you started to evolve a strategy?
I had no strategy when I started out. I was 22 years old. I had graduated college. I had taken a year off, and in that year off, I had like 5 part-time jobs. I mean, I worked construction. I was a bartender. I did soccer refereeing. I did individual sessions at a local indoor facility, and I had a club team. And after about a year of that, I was like, I don't know how much more I want to do all of this. So I ended up going to grad school to pursue a master's in psychological science. And there I was kind of walked into the coach's office, and I asked if they needed any help, asked if I could volunteer. So I loved the game, something I wanted to be around. And they said, yeah, we'd love to have you. And, volunteer positions can kind of be all across the spectrum. It can be, hey, put these cones down and chill out, or it can be, whatever you want to make of it. And I think they were surprised the first preseason I was there. I was on the field 8 hours a day because I helped with both the men and the women's programs. And then all of a sudden regular season hits and I show up to the office at like 9 a.m. They're like, why are you here? I'm like, well, I'm here to help. Like, let's get some stuff done. And so that slowly but surely over a year and a half or to 2 years, about midway through the second year, they're like, is this something you want to do as a career? I'm like, I can do this as a career? Like, they're like, yeah, you can, like, let's get that involved. So that kind of was the spark that kind of lit the fire, if you will. And I was blessed to have those 2 individuals, Rob Fulton at Shippensburg University and Jeremy Spearman at Shippensburg University, that kind of really fostered that belief that that's something I could do. And they were instrumental in kind of spurring along the rest of the college career, as far as jumping from there to University of Scranton, then to Slippery Rock University, and finally Campbell, and now Moorhead. So it was one of those things where I did not have a plan, but I showed a lot of interest and a lot of work, and I had 2 individuals that believed in me and wanted the best for me as well. So I think you always need someone in your corner that sees your worth as an individual first, and not just what you can bring to the table, and then can really help facilitate you to achieve your goals.
I love
And
that.
I've been blessed. I've been blessed at all stops to have that kind of in my corner.
I love that, and I think that's so important, as you say, to have that in your corner and that you show appreciation towards that and still do. But also the fact that these two people gave you those opportunities to do so, especially when you were giving so much time to them. Because as much as you could walk through the door and say, "I'm here to volunteer and commit your time," sometimes that can be too flexible in terms of how people might take that away and see, right, can we squeeze another 3 months of volunteering out of him and say save a little bit more on the pay package for etc. But it's good that you sort of have bounced around, because as much as sometimes I fall into it, I'm like, right, I have bounced around a little bit in my career, and now I'm starting to refine the process in terms of that strategy and where I want to go with it. But at the end of the day, when I work with some of the students that I have, I say to them, as long as you've got a background, as long as you've got some education, you can build on that, and it's not going to be the end of the world. Because sometimes I work with some of our most challenging pupils in the secondary school, so trying to get their motivation and attainment up can be quite difficult. So it's okay to bounce around. It's okay not to have a strategy, because at the end of the day, if you hadn't bounced around, you might not have the experience of construction, which you might take into your own home, or you might not have the experience of working in a bar and dealing with tough customers, and therefore you can take that onto the field and how you build those relationships with, say, players who are not as open straight away. So all that has pieced you together and has landed you in a great place and a great life with a wife that you can enjoy time with, and have all those little things. So for me, it doesn't have to always be pre-planned, because life can still work out great as long as you want it to.
You just got to be proactive in it. I think the proactive in your journey, whatever your journey is. And I think a big thing is, one of the things I value most in individuals I work with, whether it's coworkers or players, and it's something I try my hardest to maintain, is a growth mindset. Being a sponge is what I always kind of say. You don't know what you don't know, and if you get into a situation where you're uncomfortable, it's okay. It means you're growing. It means you're learning. You have to be able to embrace that, and sometimes that is way harder than it sounds. But I think as long as you're able to kind of have that self-talk and be like, okay, I'm learning, I'm growing, I'm getting better at these things, and actively track those things that you're getting better at. And I've had some of those experiences. I've had those experiences at every stop I've been at, where it's like, okay, this is different. And I think that's kind of also the pathway of an assistant coach, is every time you switch a location, not only you're learning new processes, you're learning new ways of doing things, ways to think about things. And if you sit there and think, well, I've done this before, this is the only way to do it because I've done it and that's how it gets done. It's not always a benefit. And I think all of us from time to time can kind of fall into that trap, but it's the ability to recognize you're in that trap, and whether it takes 2 weeks to recognize it or 2 months or a year to recognize it, you can then grow from it though.
And I love what you say about growth mindset there, and it touches upon maybe what might be a big part of your philosophy in terms of what you might take away in your own personal coaching, and if you were to become a head coach at any point, what you might go and instill straight away. So you might take over an underperforming team or a team which isn't performing where it should be, etc. And you could go, right, first thing I want to do is address the growth mindset. Where are the players currently thinking at? How are they looking towards their aspirations? Do they have motivations? How are we uplifting? And so it sounds like a good core of that. And when that comes to that growth mindset, how do you instill that in terms of the program that you currently have? And is that something which you really piece together a great period of time towards working upon over a course of a season?
Yeah. So the first thing when we took over Moorhead, Chris Fox and I, it was a bit of a rebuild, and that's a bit of an understatement, but it was a rebuild. And the first thing we did with the players, we sat them down and said, okay, who are you? And they gave a bunch of adjectives out. We're clicky, we're this, we're that, whatever it may be. And we're saying, okay, well, who do you want to be? We're like, okay, we want to be conference champs. We want to be a team that supports and looks out for each other at all corners, and various other adjectives as well. And then the third question was, well, how do you get there? If this is where you are and that's where you want to be, what's the process in between? And we do this every year. We do it every fall and every spring, because every season is a brand new team. You have people leaving, you have people coming in, so everyone has to be on the same page. Even if you have 20 individuals that have done it before and you have 3 new ones, those 3 new ones need to be on the same page. And those goals are going to obviously progress each season as well. And I think constantly reminding them from those aspects is huge. It is throughout the entire season a constant reminder. And we also utilize, I mentioned his name already, but Bill Beswick. We work with him throughout the season, and the insight and professionalism he brings to the table is cannot be overstated. It is fantastic. So there's a couple mindsets that we've taken from him as well, and one that he pushes and our girls have latched onto and love, and the staff as well, is fighter mentality versus victim mentality. There's things like, hey, a fighter loves being coached and having constructive criticism. A victim fears it. A fighter loves the challenge. A victim endures the challenge. So various aspects like that, and we all fall victim from time to time, myself included. But the goal is to always be shifting towards that fighter mentality, and that's the beauty of team sports. You have 30 other individuals that are around you that know your goals and know your aspirations. And if you're not acting in a manner that takes you closer to those goals and aspirations, it is our expectation here that you have someone helping remind you to that. And sometimes it's as easy as, hey, that's a victim mindset there. And you're like, yep, you're right. But to be able to do that, there has to be that love and trust within the locker room for that to take place. And so that's huge. Culture is the foundation of kind of everything we try to do here. If you have the best players and they're fit and they're athletic and they're technical and tactical, but they don't believe in themselves, they don't believe in the game model, and they don't believe in the coaching staff, everything's going to fall apart.
I really love that, because it sounds like a great model which you've got to take away, and it's something that you can really build upon. So opens up in terms of that psychological aspect, in terms of that game model, how you work with the players. And I like what you say about that fighter mentality and that victim mindset as well. How that love and trust comes into play, how it builds your culture and foundations, what those goals and aspirations look like, those expectations, and how you can utilize those relationships which you touched upon earlier to introduce reflective practice when bringing new players in at different periods, and how that might fit into recruitment. So naturally, just by having a conversation, we've already pieced together parts of a puzzle, as you will, about opening up, which is truly great, and it's something that I love to hear, because it does relate to some similar work by like Edward Bono, for example. So a book that I'm currently reading through, and he talks about the 6 thinking hats. So you might wear a red hat, I might wear a black hat, and in terms of those 2 different hats, we're thinking about different aspects and having a different consideration of thinking, whereby you might have a different idea to me and I might have a different one, but we thought about it in different perspectives. So then we might put on the same hat and then come together to collaborate on that idea, and therefore how we can piece that together. So it sounds similar, because as you might develop that fighter mentality, you might have some players in a big squad which might fall away at some periods of time. So how can you develop their ways of thinking in those methods to really change those aspirations to get them into that fighting mentality, away from that victim mindset? Because they could easily say, Mark, why haven't I been picked this week? I've not been picked for 5 weeks in a row, I've been on a bench 5 weeks. Suddenly that's a victim mindset, whereas going, how can I get into the team? What can I do to further myself? And they're changing that mentality just by the questioning techniques which they're putting in place. Because you might go, right, we can do this, we can do that, we can work on this. This is what I'd like you to see. So I think that in touching that and unpacking that looks really good in terms of what you bring to the table and how that looks across that philosophy.
100%. And I'm sorry to take it back to this, but Edward, how do you spell his last name?
No, it's not a problem at all. So Bono, Bono.
Okay. And what's the name of the book?
So the book is 6 Thinking Hats. Yes, 6 Thinking Hats.
That.
No
I like
problems.
that thought process, and I'm going to look that up. So appreciate that.
That's no problems at all.
Yeah. And now, after that, I forgot the question you asked.
No, it's completely fine. So as you see my head dipping, I'm just making notes every time you said something.
Yeah.
So mate, like as I see like podcast call, I see it as like a learning process right throughout. But it was just more touching upon that fighter mentality, that victim mindset, and how that changes. So when players come to you and say, Mark, for example, I haven't been picked for the last 5 games, I've been on the bench. Instead of going, why aren't I being picked? Why aren't I in the first team? They can actually pose a question in a different way and putting that thinking hat towards from that victim to fighting mentality, going, what can I do to get there? What can I do to break into the first team? What can I do to improve my performance? And therefore they're changing those aspirations, and then that develops a work which you're able to do with them.
Oh yeah, 100%. It's a process throughout throughout. It's a never ending process. It's not just through the season. It happens. It's through the recruiting process. It happens, as their alumni as well. We have players that reach back out, and I can even think of a player that was trying out for a semi-professional team, and she was like, "Well, what if this happens?" Or what if you're constantly worried about the what ifs, you can't think about the what nows. What do you have to do right now? And so it was a big conversation with her as far as like, listen, like, you derive confidence from your preparation, your history, and recognizing your strengths. And she was struggling to do that. And it's just part of it's like, hey, build the confidence back up, have that fighter mentality, go into this new unknown situation that you're unsure about, and focus on the what nows. A lot of things we talk about the controllables with our girls a lot. What do you have direct control over? You don't have direct control over if you're picked for the starting lineup. You don't have direct control over, the easy ones are like the ref decisions, the weather, all that stuff. But what do you have control over? We talk about you have your control of your role, meaning understanding what your role is in the team, and even so much from a tactical standpoint on the field, understanding what decisions I should be making in various phases of the game or areas of the field. Your attitude, so that's body language, that is the energy you bring, that is the way you communicate with individuals, all things encompassing attitude. And the last one, which is arguably the one we I don't want to say value the most, but the one we push the most, is your response. What is your given response to any situation? It can be as simple as on the field you lose a ball. What's your response? It could be, hey, you're not starting today. What's your response? And the way you structure your response can lead you down a positive growth path or a negative non-growth path, if you will. I don't want to get into the weeds, but we talk about ants, automatic negative thoughts. Your brain, the way your brain works, you're always going to have an emotional response first and a logical response second. And if you can recognize that and feel the emotions, but then act upon the logical response, that's going to help maintain that role, attitude, and response as you go through.
And it sounds very similar to the work that I do. And I'm just thinking of some young people that I work with in terms of the work. And I think you're absolutely bang on there in terms of that emotional followed by logical, especially if you're on a football field, for example, because, automatically you've got the referee, you've got the players around you, you've got what your coaches are saying, you've got your external environment that's around you. So you're going to react emotionally, and you've got like split 10 seconds, if that. And that is a very big push in amount of time, which is very short in reality. And you're making that decision based on how the team is going to react in the space that you've been given. So there's a lot in terms of how your brain is ticking. So rather than just ticking once, it's ticking like 1,000 times per absolute minute of each second. So there is so much within that, and that emotional response can play such a critical part for a player in terms of how they perceive that, develop that reflective practice, and how they take that forward.
Yeah, you used the term reflective process a couple of times, and that's 100%. Whether it's in a small, minute period of time or over a larger period of time, I think it's important. Like, emotions aren't bad, and to just deny them or neglect them, I think, can lead you down a not so positive path. But I think you have to feel those emotions and then reflect upon them, and use a logical brain to reflect upon the emotions you're feeling, and then choose a path you want to take versus the emotion is dragging you down a path.
Absolutely. And I think those emotions can lead you down a path. And when you come about giving those solutions, it sounds almost as if you're scripting for a player in terms of how they can think about what their emotions might be, what they might do in that situation. And sometimes when in the back of my mind now, I'm thinking when you do script something, you can become robotic. You can have those automatic responses. But I think having a script actually isn't a bad thing, because even then, as I was thinking about what you were saying, I was thinking, right, actually, if there is a script, how could this be beneficial to the young people that I work with? And it does give them a logical process, a sense of, right, how can I slow the thinking down just a little bit to automatically create a solution rather than creating a problem, and how then I can process this and take it forward. And therefore, you're able to generate that process even more.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you were talking there, my mind went to through discipline, you find freedom. So it might seem robotic, where it's like, okay, I have to calm down. I have to then, but you have all the power then as the individual. You have all the power to make the decisions then based off the way you reflect on that process. If you we already said it, but if you allow the emotions, and that might seem like freedom, but your emotions are actually dragging you. You've removed your power from the situation.
And I think once you remove that power from a situation, it can actually play two parts, where it's going to either be detrimental or it can be beneficial. But I think it's in terms of how that discipline leads to freedom, because again, I think just touching upon it, if you're scripting something, you're being very disciplined in terms of those expectations. It might be robotic, and then players start to do it. But actually, if you create that freedom within that, it's actually going to create a great process for both that technical ability, that psychological, how then that reflects in terms of how it looks in the team and tactical. And you're already putting out those four elements just by one key piece of work, which then ticks a lot of boxes, rather than not just box ticking, but it does tick all the boxes just by one great piece of work, which elaborates on a bigger picture.
100%, yeah. I think, and that takes you even outside of the game. The ability to not remove your power from a situation. Every situation, you have the power to make decisions, even if it doesn't seem like it. Even if you have like a higher up force or entity that's telling you, no, you do it this way, you still have the power to decide if you want to do it that way. But every decision has consequences. You just have to be okay with those consequences. If you're working at Bank of America and the branch director says, hey, I need you to do this by today, you have the power to say no. You might not have a job the next day, but you have that power to say no. I think always reminding individuals that they are powerful and they have the ability to make those decisions and to find that freedom through the discipline, that allows individuals to now not just feel like they're a product of their environment.
And I love what you touched on there, product of an environment. And that is something which I've really listened to before, because you do become a product of your environment by the place that you grow up in, by the team that you play in, by those habits, by those cultures, by those values which you instill. So you're creating an environment whereby you have that reflective practice, whereby you are psychologically thinking, and therefore you're striving for that fighter mindset. But from a goalkeeping aspect, and someone who is big on goalkeeping, a lot of squads that I have spoken to, or coaches which have talked about their squads, they might say, right, I might have 4 to 5 goalkeepers. And for me, I'm like, what? How would you have 4 to 5 goalkeepers in your roster? I was like, I've only ever had 3 in one of my rosters, and that was very difficult for an 11-a-side team at under 13s, 14s. And I found that difficult rotating them, because they were all very good goalkeepers, all had their strengths. And when I was picking a team, I'd be like, right, I want goalkeeper A because he's very good at kicking out his hands, or goalkeeper B is actually better at shot stopping, for example. So when you have, say, 5 goalkeepers, that's very tough to sort of make that selection process, I suppose, at times. Not being a goalkeeping coach myself, but how you then might be a little bit more protective over them, or might get a little bit more time to see them and give that feedback to the coaching staff on that selection from a goalkeeping standpoint to build on. But when it comes to that fighting mindset and victim mindset, do you think that plays in a bigger part for just goalkeepers, because there's only one position and 5 of them, and whereas you might get a left back, but they might play left wing back, and they might be able to slot in at centre back? Do you think that mindset affects goalkeepers more than outfielder players?
I don't want to say more, but I would say in a unique manner, for sure. I think the old adage where the hardest position mentally on the field is the second string goalkeeper. You're grinding every single day, but you might never see a single minute. And that's where it comes back to the controllables. Like, what is your role? How well do you feel your role? If your role is the second string, so we actually, for myself, we define the roles of the 1, 2, 3, and 4 if we have one, and what their expectations. And we say, this is your role currently. Doesn't mean roles don't change, but in your current role, these are the expectations that you need to be carrying out. If you progress or regress in those roles, then the expectations change, and we can have a meeting to talk about those things. But I think a big thing for goalkeepers is fully transparent communication. Where do I stand? Why do I stand there? And what can I do to progress? And if you drop a goalkeeper in mid-game or for another game and start another one, it's the communication of why that's been done. I think especially as you get higher and higher levels, many goalkeepers, at least in my experience, are very analytical. And so it's having the information of now how they can move forward in their trainings or move forward in their life and have an understanding They might not agree with it, but as long as they see that there was thought process behind it and can potentially understand those processes, that tends to, allow for less hectic environment, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, it does. And just thinking upon now, if you say you've got 5 goalkeepers, but say number one is absolutely the best, they've got the greatest opportunity to break through in, say, perhaps a professional game or a scholarship. They're there to push. But the second and third choice goalkeepers have a good opportunity. They're not as good as the number one goalkeeper, but they could get a scholarship if they wanted to. They have that ability, and maybe by going down a different pathway and having a bit more exposure to, say, first team football by playing in a different division, for example, it might actually allow them to develop their skill set a little bit more technically, because they might have been limited by playing 5 goalkeepers, etc., but they might find the right division. And that is the art of the sport, because I've been there, I know what it's like. It's like, well, my third choice goalkeeper is an excellent choice for us as a squad, but he might be very good by dropping down a couple of divisions and playing first team goalkeeper for this team. And therefore, when it gets to that point, you get to look at second and third. Do you feel that it's difficult to try and maximise opportunities to give them more minutes to do so? Or is it, a bit of, that is what high performance sport is, and that's why the number one goalkeeper has been selected?
I think the last thing you said is more of the answer. I mean, in the spring, for us, it's about player development. Our goalkeepers are pretty evenly rotated through sessions and in games. In the fall, the job changes. The entire dynamic of the team changes. It's not about individual player development. It's about team growth, team development, and how well we can perform throughout the season. With talking with second, third string, even we call, everyone has a different name for it. We call it our goalkeeper core. So within that core, I think it's very easy to, if you don't manage it properly, for it to become a toxic environment. Like, oh man, I want Luca to drop this ball so I can get in. We frame that very differently. We have a meeting every fall and every spring to talk about the culture of our goalkeeper core and what we want it to be. And the big underlying factor of that is run your own race. Luca, if Luca today is better than Luca yesterday, that's a success. If Mark today is better than Mark yesterday, that's a success. It doesn't matter if I was better than you today. That's rainbows and butterflies, road-colored glasses, but we push that every single day. And one way we do that is we have them, within reason, coach each other. They have an understanding of the position, whether they can execute it or the final action or not. They have an understanding of what needs to be done. And many times that coaching point isn't for the person receiving it, but it's for the person giving it. Now they're thinking critically and abstractly about the position, and they're getting something more out of it. Even from a standpoint of, we have performance planners that we give every player, and our goalkeepers are included in that. And are you taking notes post-session? Are you taking notes pre-session? Are you watching your film and taking notes? So there's ways to develop. If you are only waiting for you to receive a coaching point to develop, you're missing about 80% of your developmental process. And so we try to empower our players to take their developmental process in their own hands. So if you take it in your own hands, you can cover about 80% of it, and the other 20% is the coaching points. Kind of getting a little bit off topic, I guess, but with that second and third string, those are the conversations we're having. Like, what can you bring to the environment? How can you better the team? That's what the fall's about. The fall is always we over me. The team's first. So yeah, you might not be happy that you're not playing, but what can you do to better yourself and better the team? And with that mindset, we even talk a lot about, and it happened this year, it happened last year. If you're the first string and you get pulled, are you happy you got pulled? Absolutely not. You're angry. You're feeling all those emotions. But if your mindset is, how can we get our core better, then you are friggin' pumped for that person getting their shot. Even if it's at your expense, you're pumped for them because it's better for the team in this moment. Does that mean that your role now is established, that you're now the second string? Not at all. It just means that in that moment, the core has changed slightly. And then for that moment, you are the second string. So your expectations or what the second string does. And then those things constantly get reevaluated each week, each session, each game. And so it's constantly in flux.
I think that's a really interesting and powerful insight in terms of your goalkeeping philosophy and how you take that approach and how that looks amongst the goalkeepers, but how it solidifies their those roles, those definitions in terms of what they might have in terms of those expectations, those communications, that transparency that comes with it. And when it comes to that goalkeeper core, is that something that you've developed yourself, or we do pinch things from different coaching, but you might have taken the core and then just adjusted it in a way that you've seen from your experience?
I don't want to say. I don't think it's something I've developed at all on my own. You've heard the term probably goalkeeper union a lot, and it's a position that is very unique, and only the people that play it really have like a strong understanding from a mental and emotional side of what it kind of takes to go through it, and the idea and the kind of progression of that goalkeeper core mindset is. This could be a lot harder if we were all individuals going through it, but we can all go through it together and have that support of each other as we're going through it. And it's, everyone doesn't show up their best every day. And can we help those people get to that spot? Because if they're at their best in the sessions, it means the session's better. And it means I'm getting better as a result of the session. So whether you look at it from a selfless mindset or a selfish mindset, you're still getting better and the core is getting better.
And I think a big part of that is obviously a technical side, but also that mindset, that emotion that comes into play as well. And as much as you can track and monitor technical growth and you can have that evaluation of it, back to your point earlier where you can actively track what you're getting better at. And that might be that emotion in terms of how you think over that course of the day of, was I better than I was yesterday? Have I improved? And it's that position how you can gear towards that fighter mindset. But how would you say that you're able to actively track the players' growth in terms of their emotions, in terms of their responses, in terms of their psychological output, when it can be, so difficult to do so?
From a third party tracking it, I haven't come up with a way yet. I think it's a lot of communication in that relationship building aspect. I think also as the individual if you're an individual going through those processes or those environments, you yourself might not even recognize that it's happening. So I think it's hard for a third party to track it, but I also think it's hard for the individual to track it. But together, because I see things you don't, you see things I don't, together we can kind of come together and have those conversations where it's, no, hey, 2 months ago, you would have freaked out if this was done to you. But look at you now. Oh yeah, I never thought about that. What are you doing? Well, I'm doing this to help with this processes. Well, it's working then. Like that's because I might see the outcome, but they might see the process. So be able to put them together, you can actually see that growth. I haven't come up with a way to personally track it without those interactions, and I haven't like objectified it to be able to track it in those manners. There are, we have player profiles in each of our goalkeepers, and there's areas of limitations and areas of strengths across all aspects of the position, those 6 pillars that we talked about. And it's like, if we see like, for instance, we have a freshman goalkeeper that, transition to college is always difficult for whoever it may be. And even things like, making sure you're hydrated, making sure you're properly fueled, that goes into the lifestyle pillar. And if they're struggling with that, that's something that I can see as a coach. Like, hey, what's going on? Like, have you eaten today? No. Well, when's the last time you had water? I don't know. Like, okay, well, that's something I can see that maybe they didn't, but I can help that software skill, that lifestyle pillar, if you will, hopefully nudge it in the right direction. And I think it's just constantly being present with your players to be able to see those things.
I completely agree with you, because if you're constantly present, instead of that actual data, that tracking, that input of it, you can see it observationally as well. Because as much as I think of the young people that I'm with every day, I've been able to see some real growth over the last year, and even though that hasn't been tracked as such, but just observationally, such as the way that they enter the building, such as their little mannerisms, that can come into complete play of how you can actively track how they're progressing over that time, and that is from the amount of time that I spent with them, the amount of time that you spend with the players that you see, and you're going to see that with the goalkeepers maybe more than the head coach who might spend a bit more time with the outfield players, for example. So it's a great way of working with independent units within the squad, as well as tracking those own player development pieces for that lifestyle pillar which you really touch upon.
Yeah, I mean, that's 100% as far as, that it's qualitative versus quantitative, right? And I think you can quantify some of the things we're talking about. If you had a staff of 20, right, and like you're monitoring their diet, you're monitoring their hydration aspects, and you can quantify it in that and from that standpoint. But I'm not capable of currently doing that. But then you also start removing some of that freedom and that power that they have to make their own decisions to better themselves. And we talk about that 80% of their personal development that fall in their 80%.
Absolutely. And when it comes into it then, just touching upon, motivation, immediate and long-term rewards, sometimes we lack that motivation in the short term because we're always thinking about that long-term aspiration. So for the goalkeepers, it might be a long-term aspiration to become the number one goalkeeper, or it might be long-term aspiration to become or to get that scholarship. And that can be hard over a period of time because as much as we might amount, segmented goals whereby we can build towards the future. We were like, right, your next step is to perform on a 6.5 average rating level across 10 games. That might be a goal within itself, and then you can start to quantify that over a period of time, and therefore that period of 3 years will excessively move forward within a good grace. But that motivation can be really difficult because as much as us, even in our individual lives, I want to buy a house, when's that looking like? That might be 7 years away from now because we might move with my family, we might buy a house there, we might settle down. And that can be difficult because you have to get through that 7-year process. But when it comes to that motivation in that current context, in how that looks, how do you maintain and motivate your players for that long-term output? And how do you work with them to do so?
Well, the first thing I'll say is, when motivation is lacking, the discipline kicks in. So that's a huge thing, but that's all good and dandy to say. It's another thing to act it out. But then we start talking about the outcome versus process and finding joy and finding happiness in the process. An analogy I use a lot is you're going on a hike and you're trying to reach to the top of a mountain. If all you're doing is staring at the mountaintop, you're going to be tripping over roots, rocks, stumps, all that other stuff. But if all of a sudden you put your head down and you start looking at your feet, you're going to be able to jump over the stumps. You're going to be able to step over the rocks. You're going to dodge the roots. And all of a sudden you pick your head up and boom, you're at the mountaintop. It's a bit of a paradox where when you stop focusing on what you want so much, you typically do start doing the processes it takes to get you there. And that's just reiteration constantly as far as like process over outcome. And it can't just be like, process over outcome. Okay, I'm just going to go through the process then. But you have to be an active participant in it. You have to, we've thrown out buzzwords like we talked about already, but the growth mindset aspect of it, you have to say, it has to be that preparation to understand what your process is and how you're going to carry that process. So if you're talking about a house in 7 years, comes back to, Bill Bestwick, dropping his name again, he always asks our girls, what do you want? How bad do you want it? And what are you willing to sacrifice to get it? And if you can answer those 3 questions truthfully, then you have your pathway. And then, so you're looking at the house again, and that's the biggest thing you want, and you want it more than anything, and you're willing to do anything to get it. Well, now we can start coming up with a process to get it. Maybe I'm not going to Starbucks 5 days a week now, and I'm saving that money, that coffee money in a little till on the side. It's, picking up that extra session or that extra camp that you don't want to do. And that money, instead of going for a nice dinner, is now going to the till on the side. And then slowly but surely, after you walk up the mountain, all of a sudden, then you got the keys in your hand to your house.
Absolutely, I'm with you there as well. And it's just those little sacrifices which you can see. And touching upon that recruitment, that goalkeeper piece, and that motivation, a little question I thought of a little bit earlier on was, if say you're recruiting now and you get a goalkeeper who comes to you this year and they're like, right, Mark, I want to be number one. you've viewed my footage. You've come to see me at a few training sessions, etc. But where you've made that definition of those roles and what you have, you've observed them enough times to define the fact that they might be second or third choice goalkeeper. So they turn you down on the basis that they won't be number one, and therefore that might be a little bit upsetting because you've lost that goalkeeper, but knowing that you've got an array of other goalkeepers to select from. But they also have that motivation to become number one, which is great in terms of aspiration and where they want to push themselves, but maybe not that realism that they're not at that point yet, but they should accept the second or third choice goalkeeper to elevate themselves there. But they turn you down within this situation this year, and they come and approach you in a year's time, and they're like, "Look, Mark, I'm willing to work. I'm willing to come in as number two. I'd be very happy now at that position. How can you help me become number one?" Would that sort of deter you away from having a conversation in a year's time? Or would it be, yeah, bang, you are the perfect fit now because you've elevated that mindset in terms of that growth over a period of year, and you could actually complement the work that we're going to do, and I'm going to help you get to what you want to do?
The second one, 100%. I mean, people grow, people change. I think it's very easy to take an experience and a situation and say, well, that's static. That's not changing. Everything always changes. People change. People grow. People have more experiences, have more insights. And if that given situation that you just painted, that would be the conversation. Okay, if you're ready, then let's see if we can make this happen. It's not, oh, you said no to me, I'm not interested. For me, if they said no at that moment, then they weren't right at that moment. Because if they came in thinking I'm going to be number one, even after I told them no, it's probably two or three, unless you change some things drastically, and they come here, they're going to be miserable. And if someone's miserable, it's not good for them. It's not good for the team. It's not good for the program. And so they're not the right fit at that moment. But in year later, in that moment, they might be the perfect fit. And so it'd be foolish, I almost think, to neglect that. But I do think there's other things, other variables you have to then kind of suss out. Then, okay, why have that mindset changed? What has your process been? So it can't just be at face value, like, oh, hey, welcome aboard. It's got to be, talk me through what the change has been. How are you thinking about things now? And then figuring out, then if their new identity, their new version of themselves, does that fit with what the program needs at that moment? Could it, right spot, wrong time can work both directions.
Absolutely, I'm completely with you there. And in terms of that, programs might turn players down, or like, oh, actually, you're turning our program down. The basis of the program is that it comes first and foremost. So actually, you could lose what might be a very good scholar in a year's time, and turning down quality over what you might have seen in the short term over that long term could actually be, shooting yourself in the foot rather than taking this player on board and developing them. Only then, sometimes you've got to take those risks, and the risk might be, yeah, do you know what? They might quit the program in 3 months' time because they've been offered number one somewhere else, and I knew where I was at. But unless you have that development mindset, that piece where you get that open understanding of why those motivations have changed, what has affected them, and gearing a big picture of them, and that's where the real time and the effort comes into recruitment to really piece together what could be a great gem for you.
Yeah, and I think, the recruitment aspect's huge. We are very transparent with recruits. I am brutally transparent with goalkeepers. Like, this is where I see, these are the things that you do where I see that you might struggle here. These are the things that you do where I think you'd be very successful here. This is the situation that you're walking into, and this is how it might be difficult to navigate it. I was speaking to a transfer goalkeeper last year, and I was like, listen, you might come here and never play a minute. But these are the things you get out of the environment if you've never played a minute. Is what is important to you. If playing time is number one importance, don't come here. It's not it, because I can't guarantee it. And where I see you at right now, I don't see it happening. But if that's not the number one important thing to you, then let's continue the conversation. Vice versa, on the other side, if it is, and I do believe that you can be one or two, I'm gonna be blatantly honest with that. I'm not gonna. I can never guarantee a starting spot because you never know how the transition to the program, new environment, whether it be school, geographics, program, all those things. All those are variables that now that individual has to navigate. Should you navigate all those effectively, and I see you potentially being the number one. That's how that conversation typically goes on the other side of it.
And once you have that transparency, that open, honest conversation, that real understanding of those attributed levels whereby those goalkeepers are going to be defined to roles and those expectations, so they have that firm understanding as they're coming in. What baseline behaviours do you like to observe and that you'd like to have within the players when you are talent IDing them, when you are recruiting them for them to come in and be part of the programme? And that might be a big focus on goalkeepers, for example.
So focusing on goalkeepers, are we removing the technical and tactical side of things and looking more at the software skills?
Yeah, you can do, yeah.
Okay. So one thing is I'm looking at their warm-up. That's a huge thing. A big pet peeve of mine is watching two players roll a ball back and forth to each other. I'm like, well, if that's your motivation, like if you're motivated enough to, maybe you don't have the resources of a goalkeeper, your coach at your club, at your game or whatnot. You know what you need. What can you do to get those things? And it's certainly probably not throwing a ball back and forth from 5 yards away. Even if you're by yourself, you can still get a decent warm-up. Potentially, many times they have a player that's helping them. Then hey, go stand there, strike this type of ball. So I'm looking at how well do they take control of their environment. That to me, if I see a goalkeeper that sets up their own warm-up because they don't have the resources, that's huge. That tells me they can communicate. Huge in the position itself. They have the confidence to set up their own environment. Huge in the position itself. All those little things. You know, if I'm looking in-game situations, I'm looking for how they communicate. I'm looking for if they stay engaged. Typically, positioning for me is a big one if they can stay engaged, especially vertical positioning. You know, if ball's 120 yards away, sometimes you got goalkeepers looking at butterflies and picking daisies. I was one of those when I was younger. The ability to be like, okay, I'm engaged, I'm outside my box, I'm connected to the back line, I'm still communicating, but understanding that my role of communication might be lower than it would be in my defensive third. All that paints a picture of an individual that understands themselves, understands their roles, and knows what needs. So if you're looking at the software side of things, those are things I'm kind of looking at. Because you go to a game, especially for goalkeepers, they might touch the ball once. And how are you going to scout from there? So it's a lot of that, from a technical and tactical aspect, that gets into more of your playing style and your game model of what you're wanting out of those goalkeepers. And so I think it's easier to kind of make it more universal if you talk about the software skills and things.
Absolutely, and okay. So if we were to flip it to a technical side and say, right, Mark, I want you just to recruit 2 technical keepers to fit this type of profile. We need them in, say, a month's time because we're really lacking in this position. We need to cover injuries. Do you look at baseline behaviours in terms of a technical aspect then?
Yeah, I mean, so if I'm recruiting a goalkeeper specifically for us, I am looking at the baseline behaviors from a technical and tactical standpoint. You know, everything for me, efficiency of movement's huge. If you need to get to spot A to spot B and you can do it in the most efficient manner, that's a big gold star for me. I'm less you have to hit when I say this, you have to be at a foundational level, but after we're past that foundational level, I'm less concerned about some of the technical aspects. If saying like, can you catch a ball? Can you dive and catch a ball? Like that's what I mean by the foundational levels. If you have those and it needs to be a little tweaked, I'm not too concerned about it. From a tactical side standpoint, I'm looking at decision making. Where are you positioning yourself? What decision are you making? Are you coming out? Are you staying back? What type of save are you making in certain situations? Those come into play quite a bit as well. Obviously, those can be tweaked when they get to you as far as decisions they're making. You know, you look at the higher levels of the college game. You know, this is arbitrary, but it's not. At the same time, I don't have the exact numbers in front of my face, but it's something like 80% of goals can come down to a difference of decision making. Very few goals are coming because of a technical deficiency. So with that in mind, I'm looking for that foundational level and everyone's foundational level is going to be different, but for us, that foundational level of technical ability, things that we can tweak, because the other side of goalkeeping is style. You know, you might feel real comfortable stepping out 3 or 4 yards off, 3, 4, 5, 6 yards off your line to make a save, whereas I might feel more comfortable dropping back to my line and giving myself more time. For me to put a goalkeeper in a cookie cutter mold and say, well, they do it that way, they're not going to work here. That's not the case. I mean, you have styles across the board, even in the Prem, where it's, you know, you look at Lloris versus Courtois and how they play the position, drastically different, but they're both uniquely successful at what they do. So to be able to push someone into a mold that tight, I think you do yourself a disservice by missing out on a goalkeeper that could really help you, but might be a slightly different style than you're comfortable with.
And so when it comes down to that then, is it easier to adapt the goalkeeper to the playing philosophy, to the framework of the team, or is it easier to recruit a new goalkeeper to fit what you want to play?
From a tactical side of things, it all comes to growth mindset again. But from a tactical side of things, it is going to be easier if they play a similar style, and not necessarily a similar style, but their actions that they're being asked to take in the game are similar to actions they'd be asking for us to take in a game. But from a specific, like, am I recruiting specifically a goalkeeper from a tactical standpoint? Yes, that I am looking for them to be able to create similar actions that we would be asking them to do. From the technical side, no, I'm not. You know, I have 4 goalkeepers. All of them have drastically different styles of play. And for me to say that's right, that's wrong, I can't really do that. I can do that, though, if they're failing at what they're doing. So it's like, hey, this is my style. I want to do it this way. That's all good and dandy, but I just watched 8 balls go past you doing your way. So maybe let's think about it in a different manner. That's the only time we start tweaking styles and tweaking techniques outside of the foundational stuff.
And so that's important because, you know, those little tweaks can be really important. And again, it might become down to the goalkeepers that you do recruit, and they might come in, but the way that you relate to that and you know, coming back to those players who might come to you in a year's time, and that importance of putting time in, it's something that I was listening to and reading upon the other day. So what you might have there is what might be called as a sleeping talent, and it's been defined in a paper in terms of identification of sleeping talent using psychological characteristics in junior elite hockey players. So they talk about hidden gems or whispering talent. So players who have seen less of at a talented point, so point A in time, and they exceed expectation and perform at a high level of performance at a later date. So that might be the goalkeeper that can approach you in year 1, and then by year 2 they're happy to take up that second position spot. So already you've unlocked sleeping talents, and that's an outcome and an actionable for your program for that outcome, and therefore you haven't lost that sleeping talent. And it can be hard because scouts tend to discard early on those who are not talented at those moments, but their job should be not to find current talent, their job should be to find future talent, and therefore a good way to visit their original assessment earlier on in the season and who has improved the most. So it's that sort of tracking, that framing, that working with goalkeepers, that talent which you might not see already, but how you see those baseline behaviours evolve and adapt over a period of time, which can really then unlock that sleeping talent to really take forward into your program, and therefore, you know, become an asset, therefore develop and become a critical part of the way that you play and build upon that.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you have a matrix of check boxes, I think certain boxes have to be checked for you to kind of go down that pathway. And I'll give you an example. I've had a goalkeeper that we recruited, and came from a very rural area, very small club, made the conscious decision on her own to join a larger club where she would get more training, and now as a result has to drive 2 hours a day for 3 days a week. That was her decision, and the only reason I've learned that is through conversations with her and her family and stuff like that. That tells me a lot. The fact that you yourself says I want more, and you are now seeking out that. It wasn't just like I'll go to a tryout. They ended up calling the director of the club, calling the coaches of the club, saying, "Hey, this is the situation I'm in. This is what I want." That's huge from a young person navigating those communications, those situations. That checks a lot of boxes down here. And then So we look at that goalkeeper and we go, okay, she's a little raw in these areas. She's needs a little more polishing in these areas. And then I think sometimes it's harder in such a vast country as far as those relationships that you can build with their individual coaches. But luckily, I had a relationship with her individual coach, and I said, "Listen, we're very interested. These are the things that I need to see develop over the next 6 to 12 months." And we talked, and it is me checking in periodically, and like, oh, that just in 2 months has skyrocketed. Okay, now that's a couple other check boxes over here where it's okay, her coachability, her ability to grow, her ability to retain information, like that's huge. Now, and then I saw her, then I saw her later on in the process, and I'm like, okay, you're good. Come on in. Like the fact that you have all these things checked, and I've seen this growth and development. I'm okay with some of these other areas that might need still be polished up, but I'm not fearful that it won't be able to happen here because I've seen the other areas get polished up quickly. And so I think that goes with that whispering talent, sleeping talent, where it's like, if you have the ability to track it, there's no heart in tracking it. But at the same time, with such a large country, so many individuals, some people, not right or wrong, some people might say no because I can have this goalkeeper here already. And I don't think there's a right or wrong to it. I think it's just everything is situational. 5 years from now, if that situation arose, another goalkeeper in the wings elsewhere, that I'd say, okay, that's the solution this time.
I completely see that way of thinking and that great way of working with goalkeepers. And just on that aspect of that, you might be able to find a goalkeeper, say, at point C, and then you've got a goalkeeper, say, at point E. So point C, you're able to get through point B and A and get them to a really refined position for them to go off and have opportunities elsewhere, etc. Or you can have a goalkeeper which you can take right from point E all the way up to point A. Do you prefer, on a general aspect, to work from point C to point A, or would you prefer getting a goalkeeper and going, yeah, we're going to repeat this process over again?
It would depend how long that process is, because at the end of the day, where I'm at, it's a results based. So sometimes we don't have the time to do that. And so, I mean, I would say uniformly, I would say in general, I would say the C to A I would prefer, but doesn't mean I'm not looking at the E. But again, they have to have these other boxes checked for me to be able to see that E could progress quickly into those areas.
And touching upon that motivation piece, that talent ID, that growth, that development, that self-regulatory learning, which we just touched upon, that aspiration towards the future, those baseline behaviours. Within that, you might have that psychological input-output, and what you might touch upon is called mind management. So within that, you have a series of mind chatter. So that is thoughts that show up from a series of conditions and present thoughts to an athlete, such as anxiety, cautiousness, and questions posed towards their performance and ability. So reflecting on that type of question, that topic, for a goalkeeper, as you said, when their head might be up in the clouds because the ball is high at play, and therefore they haven't had the touch of the ball, they're not involved, they might drop off a little bit. They might get a lot of mind chatter because they have a lot of thoughts going through the head, then therefore, they might be reflecting upon how they might catch their next ball. They might start to develop a sense of anxiety because they haven't touched the ball in a certain period of time, or they've dropped a certain amount of balls during that game. So they might experience mind chatter a lot more than an outfield player, because an outfield player might be involved a lot more. Do you think that mind chatter is really difficult to manage for a goalkeeper? Do you think it's often shows up a lot more, as you've touched upon?
I think you just hit one of the single reasons why it's such a difficult position. Not doing anything for 89 minutes and have to make a 3-save sequence in the 90th minute to save your team. It's definitely one of the reasons it's such a difficult position to play. And as far as the mind chatter, I think it does. I think there's potentially ways to navigate it, though. Recognizing that, is the chatter productive or non-productive? If it's non-productive, how can we squash it, and how can we move it more towards a productive standpoint? How and there's little, I mean, I think there's little ways of maintaining your ability to stay focused in the moment. You know, we talked about vertical positioning already. We talked about communication already. Those are ways that you can positively influence the game to be able to stay in the moment. Analyzing what's going on higher up the field in the middle third of the field, or even within the bank of the midfield's opposition in your own team. What's happening there that's frequently leading to whether it be counterattack opportunities for the opposition. Okay, now if you're analyzing that, that's keeping you focused in the game, and now you're able to see moments where it's like, oh, I see that pattern happening. I'm going to already start correcting it with this communication, with this movement, with this positioning. So I think there's ways to navigate that mind chatter and push it in a more positive direction. But I think that's also, you know, talking about ages and stages of development. And I don't think you're going to be asking a U13 goalkeeper to be actively engaged. But, you know, as you get higher and higher and higher, I think that expectation is almost there.
And so if they were having, you know, a bit of anxiety, or, you know, they're starting to reflect a lot and they have that mind chatter, so they know they've been dropping a lot of balls recently, and they've done it consistently over, say, 3 games, would you constantly go back and work on that within training, or would you try to approach it to swing around back to that so it's not the center focus of their mindset?
I would work on it. So I've been heavily, I derive a lot of influence from the FA, how they run their goalkeepers. They speak about unannounced and announced training. So if I think about, hey, I'm dropping this type of ball, and doing unannounced training is, you know, the goalkeeper knows the pattern, knows the type of ball, knows when it's going to be hit. That has its place. The transferability to the game might not be there, but one of the ways it has its place is confidence building, is repetition. Hey, this is normal. And then you're kind of rebuilding that player, right? So if they're in a deep dark hole because they're, you know, every time I come out for a cross, I'm dropping the ball. Okay, well, let's break it down. Show that I'd prove to you again that you can do it, because I know you can do it. And then let's put you in a more dynamic situation where you can see you're doing it on a regular basis. And then can we continue to build it more dynamically and more chaotically, some of the aspects of the game that are going to be asked. But I would hit on it from the sake of, especially if I've seen this player do it already, I would hit it from a place of confidence and less from a place of development. If I've never seen them do it and they are struggling with it currently, then yeah, we're hitting it from a place of development. And because I think, again, you derive confidence from your strengths, your past experiences, and your strengths, your past experience, your history, so in your preparation. And so that's giving them an outlet or a medium for them to derive that confidence from. Hey, we hit this hard this week, and you killed it the entire week. Boom, they have confidence. Their preparation's there, and that skill that they might have been struggling with. And it might not be a strength yet, but their preparation's there, and the history's there because they've seen themselves have success in it.
And I think there's so much within that which you really touch upon, and how that really reflects upon how a goalkeeper might receive that information, how they might reflect, how they might build upon, and how that then alters that drive, that preparation, what the history looks like, that outlet, that medium, the drive in terms of that confidence, and how that really takes away. But something that you really then mentioned, which is really thought-provoking, is announced and unannounced training. And I know you touched upon it there, and it's that transferability, that skill, that repetition to build upon that confidence. You know, it is something that is FA driven, and it's something which is really interesting. And when it comes into announced and unannounced, how would that look if you were planning a training session and I said, look, Mark, I want you to deliver a session this week for the squad? How would you go about planning it? Would you alter it at 50% on terms of announced, unannounced? Would it play a big part? Is it integral? Is it something which you spend a lot of time, you know, preparing for? How big is it in terms of the, you know, the training framework you instill?
I'll answer that in a second. You mentioned athlete drive, and I think it's huge to say that, especially from a goalkeeper coach standpoint, I have to understand my goalkeepers to a T, and all four of them, different personalities, different styles, all that stuff. But I brought one of my goalkeepers in this year, and like, how do you want to be coached? Because I'm struggling to coach you. Like, do you want it this way? Do you want it that way? And having that understanding of what those individuals want can benefit. And maybe if this is a player that the skill we talked about earlier they're struggling with, I might see as attacking it from an announced standpoint to build confidence. That might be exactly what they don't want. Mm-hmm. So having that conversation, and again, transparent, fluent conversation is like, hey, this is something we're struggling with. How do you want to attack it? This is my plan to attack it. What do you think about that? They might be like, no, that's terrible. I don't want to do any of that. Okay, well then let's focus on what prepares us for the next game and put that to the task because we know we can do it. Now going to the announced, unannounced stuff. From a goalkeeper standpoint, if I'm being asked to design a session to prep us for our next opponent or what it may be, because it all depends on where you're at in periodization of what you're going to be doing more and more of. So let's just say prepping for a game 2 days out. What am I doing? I'm doing 2 days out. I'm doing very little announced training. Mostly just an activation stuff. Get them used to seeing the final actions that they're going to be doing throughout the rest of the session. But it's very minimal time there. I'm talking about 10% maybe. Then we're hitting heavy into the unannounced. So unannounced is going to be, of the three things, what type of ball, what the timing of the ball, and where the ball is being placed. They only know one of those, or two of those sometimes, but one of those typically. That's a lot of our sessions going to be that. So it might be, hey, an unannounced example might be, hey, Luca's gonna hit the ball, then I'm gonna hit the ball. But they don't know what type of ball is coming, and they don't know where it's going to be placed. But they know the pattern of it coming. So now, but you and I know exactly what type of ball we're hitting. You're going to be hitting a dipping ball to the back post, and I'm going to be hitting a driven ball at their chest. And so that's prepping us for things they're going to see in the next game. And then so that would be a large portion of it. That's a very simplified version of an announced, but it kind of build from there. And then we get into things more like we call them training games. So, hey, they're going to need to be doing a lot of low dives in this next game. How can we develop a training game to do that? Maybe it's as simple as, one big goal, two baby goals, three keepers working. These two baby goalkeepers are trying to hit low dive shots on the big goal, and the big goalkeepers maybe working on some aspect of distribution or whatnot. So something that can kind of tie into the game, but it's not the main focus. And now they're getting more and more chaos, more and more dynamic looks that they might see in the game. And then by the time we're with the team and they're seeing those looks, hopefully they've been prepped in that skill that area of development that we're looking to kind of progress. So it changes if we're 1 day out, 2 day out, if we're in a bye week. All those things change as far as what that session is going to be looking like, as far as the intensity and also the methodology announced, unannounced for training game.
And I think within that comes a bit of autonomy and a bit of relationship. So, the head coach might go, right, how's the goalkeepers looking this week? I want to see a session plan for all the goalkeepers across the week and how that might look. But if you go, right, we're going to actually do some unannounced training. This is just a brief outline, but this is what I'm going to intend to do. I think that autonomy that comes into play is that trust, that relationship from the head coach to assistant coach to the goalkeeper coach plays into practice to actually go, right, yeah, we've seen this in training and this has been defined practice. But for your unannounced, yeah, this is great to see because we've actually seen a lot more repetition. We've seen confidence build. And, I think that just comes in terms of that work and that relationship, which plays an important point and piece in terms of that announced and unannounced training which takes place.
Yeah, I think that relationship's huge. It can even come from a standpoint of, hey, Mark, I'm going straight to goal today. You don't have any time with the keepers. Okay, that allows me now to know I need to bring them out 25 minutes earlier. If I want to get the stuff done that preps them to go with them, I need to do that. Even, hey, coach, what are you working on today? Well, we're working on chance creation in the final third. Okay, specifically what type of chance creation? This. Okay, what type of balls are you expecting them to finish? Okay, now I can prep going into that. Or even if you look at it away from us and more, like I said, if you're 2 days out or 1 day out from a game, what type of balls are they most likely to see against the opposition? And that's what the prep is from. But I think that relationship with the head coach is drastic. I think many times I think that also the relationship has to be built from our standpoint, from a goalkeeper coach standpoint. I can't sit here and just expect my head coach to tell me everything about everything so I can prep what I need to do. I need to go build that relationship. Hey, what are you specifically working on today? Okay, that doesn't really work with that doesn't jive with what I was planning on doing. So now my session is going to be tailored more towards the opposition than maybe what they're doing. Or maybe, hey, that checks both boxes, opposition and you're showing similar balls. Awesome, I'm going to hammer that today. Or maybe we're 3 days out from a game and I don't need to worry about the opposition too much, and I can really focus on what they're going to be seeing in practice. And still developing a skill or an attribute set that is going to show benefit later on, but maybe not for the next immediate opponent. But if we get 2 days out, 1 day out, it's about the opposition. 1 day out, it's going to be less frustrating exercises, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, it does. And when you've delivered that announced and unannounced training, and say you've had a combination of the both over a 6 month to a year period, what have you seen the biggest impact from? Which one?
Oh, unannounced for sure. I mean, like I said, the transfer, at least I think then they start getting into an ages and stages discussion again, where, going with a U13 goalkeeper and doing, a 40-minute session on unannounced training, that goalkeeper's going to leave pretty frustrated because they don't have that skill foundation to navigate the problems that you're throwing at them. But for me, where I'm at, unannounced is a big one. I've started, and I haven't done it long enough to track, but I've started throwing a lot more training games where they're learning their development through the chaos of what's in front of them. But again, if they don't have the foundational set of skills to navigate those problems, it's going to not be a good situation.
For sure, sure. And just touching upon, players do experience social exclusion over a course of a season, and that might play a big piece in terms of goalkeepers as well, because they might feel socially excluded in terms of the viewpoint of, the position that they play. If they're like the fourth or fifth choice goalkeeper, for example, they might feel that they're not included. But I think the goalkeeping union and that goalkeeping core, which you've touched upon, plays a very big piece in terms of overcoming that social exclusion, which you've touched upon, and it's really beneficial. So for you, in terms of recruiting those, relationship building, getting to new players through the door, it's quite. I think, is it easier then as a goalkeeper coach, because you're working in smaller groups with a focused 3 to 5 goalkeepers, than it would be for outfielders to get into groups and build those relationships, especially with the amount of contact time you're having?
I think inherently the answer is yes, but I think it can be done with the larger group. It's just done in a very different way. I think if us as a staff had meetings out the wazoo every week with all of our players, one, we would get nothing done, and two, they'd probably get really tired of those meetings pretty quick. But it's just done in different ways. Like even on away trips, who they room with, that's something big that we do. Like, who within the game model, who are you most likely to interact with on a regular basis? That's who you're rooming with. And if you're a left center back, maybe you're rooming with the left back, maybe you're rooming with the goalkeeper, the defensive mid. Maybe those are your roommates for the first 2/3 of the season, and nothing's done beyond that. Spend time together, because maybe your best friend is the right winger, and you're grabbing coffee every day together, and you're never actually interacting with the people around you that you're operating with. And so it's not forced; it's forced, and it's not forced upon. It's forced upon that they're given in a situation, but we're not telling them anything. Hey, that's your roommate for the day. And I think that's just a small example, but I think you have a bunch of those little small examples across the board. I think you can really start building those relationships, and that area of safety within the environment is understanding that, hey, my mean, scary captain isn't actually mean and scary. They have a passion and a love for this team, and they put the team above anything else. And so if I'm operating in a manner that puts the team above everything else, I'm always in the captain's good graces.
I think that's really important. Again, it's that perception, how that comes across as well, because you might look at an individual part of the team, or it might be a relationship where it hasn't functioned or developed or evolved in a certain scheme, because that perception piece has come into play that has prevented a player from overcoming a social exclusion barrier or a barrier which has then allowed them to evolve and develop that relationship, which actually could be so critical to the team.
Yeah, I think it comes down to that individual as well. The person that's going through that social exclusion, there has to be a level of vulnerability. I think there's people romanticize the lone wolf, the rough and tumble. I'll take care of my own problems. But you're in a group. You're in a team sport. You have an entire team here that it's your responsibility to help build those relationships. So it could even be the standpoint of like being extremely vulnerable, going up to your leadership staff and being like, hey, I don't feel like I'm a part of the team, and this is how it's hurting me. I want to be a part of the team. I just don't know how to do it. Can you help me? If you come to a captain and say that, I mean, depending on what team you're at, there might be a bit of banter here and there, but then at the end of the day, they're going to be like, okay, I got you. And at least in a positive team environment, that would be the answer.
And when that player comes to approach you and they have that honest discussion, for a player perspective, then they're not putting themselves in a position where they want to be reflected or seen to be weak because they're approaching the coaches for help to elaborate a relationship between the team. I think that's actually a strong standpoint because there's nothing honourable or always beneficial in trying to be that lone wolf, in trying to be the strongest one. You might just need that facilitation just to help you get that relationship, which is actually going to be more beneficial to you. So you're more socially included. So you start to elevate your characteristics a bit more. You're included in the team. You might instill a bit more confidence within yourself, and therefore it's going to be a bigger piece in terms of how they get selected within the team, and then that technical attribute which comes in play. So it's that sort of domino effect, which domino effect can be seen as a bad thing, but sometimes it can actually domino into a spiral that's actually beneficial.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to pretend to put right or wrong, strong or weak on those individuals' feelings in that moment. I'm not feeling them. I don't know. And they might very well feel weak in that moment, but the understanding that you will gain strength through this in the long term is a positive. I think from a third party, it's very easy to say that's not weakness, that's strength. You're being vulnerable. You're showing, you're going to someone and asking for help. That's difficult to do. We can say that, but that doesn't change the fact that they might feel weak in that moment. But helping them understand through this, you gain strength is only a positive thing.
And touching to that strength and that, flipping it into a mental side, physical and a mental side then, and building upon that, the goalkeepers might be part of that periodization, or might be part of the outfield training. They have gym sessions planned in. But do you do any specific exercises with them as a goalkeeping coach in terms of any training methods that you might use to improve their fitness, agility, and perhaps explosiveness?
One, not as much as I should, if I'm being honest, and being vulnerable. We obviously have a sports performance staff. There's aspects built in with that help that they get facilitated as. We will, depending on the periodization where we are in the week, we will pepper in some light plyometrics in the activation phase of the session. But let's see. Yeah, not as much as I should, but there is stuff peppered in within the activation phase, whether it be some mobility, stability stuff, some plyometric stuff, but it's not the core focus of each activation, mostly because they're getting a lot of work through the session. They're getting a lot of work with our sports performance team, and also in the college game with 2 games a week. It's kind of hard to pepper in that. Doesn't mean it shouldn't be done, but pepper in that on a more regular basis. In the spring, it happens more often for sure. As far as like cardiovascular fitness, if the team's doing an aspect of cardiovascular fitness, we will do an aspect, but it'll be more anaerobically based. So so it might be, hey, here's a exercise with the ball. It's always with the ball. Here's an exercise with the ball between you and a partner, or just by yourself. You want 45 seconds on, 45 seconds off. So it's literally just anaerobic, boom, boom, boom. And we'll pepper that in the fall a little bit if the team's doing something more fitness related. in the spring, if there's a session where my girls are just like, hey, we want to get after it, like, and there's not really a hard focus I want to hit. Yeah, we'll do some in goal pressure training is what we call it. So taking that from Mr. Tony DeChico when he was still around with us, did in goal pressure training as far as, here is a 2 or 3 save sequence. You know what the rep looks like. It's going to build up and then build back down, and is quite difficult from a cardiovascular standpoint. But then you get a 5-minute break and you do it again, except different type of exercise. So we will pepper that in the spring if the girls are like, hey, we want to get after it, or if there's an aspect that's like, I see that that's something we need. Sometimes that's peppered in from a mental standpoint more so than it is a physical standpoint. But yeah.
Very interesting. Another key point and consideration to really look into a little bit more. But I think it's good that how you piece that together and really bring in that physical conditioning and how that plays a point and how that looks across the course of a season. But just to touch on a mental and tactical aspect, then a lot of we touched upon it a little bit with Mind Chat. We touched upon that focus. But how do you instill and try and develop focus and concentration a little bit more with your goalkeepers in terms of that preparation for games?
Yeah. I mean, tying your question there back to fitness, we do push the fitness level of goalkeepers that needs to be high, because the less fit you are, the more quickly you'll become fatigued, and then your mind just goes. Mm-hmm. You're not able to make decisions. You're not able to dissect situations in front of you. So it is pushed upon pretty heavily from that standpoint. Their expectations from a fitness level are right near our field players. I'm not going to say it's the same, but it's definitely not much lower. But again, it's more from a anaerobic standpoint. And then your question was, I apologize.
No, it's completely fine. So how do you develop the focus and concentration of your goalkeepers in preparation for a maybe game?
So a lot of times that will be done in sometimes we'll have exercises or activities that are pushing them to navigate chaos a bit more, where they have to focus on the one thing that's happening. That could be as simple as blinded shots. That could be where it's like, hey, I'm on my ball line. I know I'm where I'm supposed to be, but I can't necessarily see the ball right now, but I have to stay focused. Versus, I can't see the ball. I got to shift. Too late, goal. So it could be as simple as that. It could be as simple as a reaction-based activity where, the poor man's version that I use is throw a bunch of water bottles out in front and, hit a couple of lower balls where it might be skipping, and they have to maintain focus and their ability to be set and ready to go. If you're looking at this from the ability to mentally navigate and not necessarily staying focused on the task at hand, we'll pepper in some stuff, maybe not right prior to a game, because again, we don't want to create things that are overly frustrating the day before a game, but they'll react on, I don't like to use audio cues a lot, but they'll react on an audio cue, but we'll give them 4 or 5 audio cues, and they'll have to, so if it's red and blue, I might be yelling purple, yellow, green, black, white, and as soon as they hear blue, then they're going. Just kind of deciphering the chaos versus what needs to be focused on. Again, don't like to use audio cues too much, but we will do it occasionally in that mindset, just from a standpoint of, can I filter out the nonsense and focus on what needs to be focused on?
Very interesting for sure. And when it comes, say, halftime, when it comes to the end of the game, and the head coach is, communicating with the team, he's giving feedback, he's addressing some situations. Do you go off with the goalkeepers? Typically, how do you approach giving feedback to the goalkeepers from a goalkeeper coach perspective to try and get that detail in terms of what the coach is trying to reflect for the overall team?
Yeah, I think part of that is come down to the individual goalkeeper. To give an example from this past year, my goalkeeper liked to hear the things that were bad, liked to hear how she was doing from a positive standpoint, and liked to know one thing to focus on in the next half. And that was us talking together and figuring out what really helped her out the most during halftime, during post game. Typically, I've done that meeting after I've talked to the head coach, but prior to him talking to the whole team. It's typically 1, 2 to 3 minutes long. Just, hey, I need you to be being a more supportive positioning when your left back gets the ball because it's going to open up this, that, and the other. However, when you did hit that ball, it was perfect. I need to see that more. That's perfect. And going into the next half, your vertical positioning in relationship to that supportive angle is going to be what I need you to focus on the most. Just that would be a very quick example, and her feedback, obviously, back and forth. And if there's something on the sideline or prior to talking to her that the head coach has talked about, like, hey, we're getting stuck on one side. It's going back to our goalkeeper's feet, and their body shape isn't. He's not saying all this. He's just saying we're stuck on one side. Getting back goalkeepers going the same way. Then I'm seeing, okay, well, our body shape isn't right then. We're receiving it. We're not able to quickly see what's going on around us before the pressure gets here. That's something I need to hit with our goalkeeper. And maybe post game, that's not hit right then. That's hit in film the next day or two, where it's like, hey, this was a repeated pattern that caused us trouble and caused you trouble. I need you to see this.
Again, very interesting. Such a great insight in terms of this goalkeeping masterclass, which I feel that I'm on with you, Mark, which is absolutely, honestly, mate, it's such a fantastic insight. And just sitting back and listening and taking that away from a goalkeeping perspective and taking that away, mate, I think is great work.
I think the thing is, there's a 1,000 ways to do it. There's 1,000 ways to play the game. There's 1,000 ways to coach. I think, and you can be successful doing all of them. I think the biggest thing is understanding who you are, what you want, and does your walk match your talk? I think if those things are there, you're going to find success more often than not, depending on what your definition of success is. But I come from a very person-centered approach. Like, I genuinely care. I think you have to genuinely care about your players as individuals first and foremost. One thing we say to our players here, and that was one of the main intriguing things to be a part of the staff, is my conversations with the head coach as far as how the player management aspect of how we see our players, how they see themselves, and we align very similarly on that. But we say to our players all the time, like, you're way more than a soccer player. You're a daughter, you're a sister, you're a friend, you're an aspiring biochemist, you are a funny individual, you have all these talent that are way more than just soccer. And then if we can help them separate their identity from just being a soccer player, that now when I look at them and go, hey, that left foot, oof, it's not good. I'm not telling them they're not good. I'm not telling them they're not a good person. I'm telling them their left foot is something they need to work on. I think that separation, for me, is very important. But again, there's thousands of ways to do it.
I think that's such an important insight in terms of that identity, what you're not taking away from them as a person, what you're talking to them about as a player. And I think that piece there from the time stamps that I've just put on are so important in terms of how you piece that together and how that really takes away. But just touching upon identity there, what is the identity of the team and the way that you play?
Oh yeah, so from a team standpoint here at Morehead State, we do value possession. We want to play a quote unquote attacking, attractive attacking style of play. Not about creating 40 chances, it's about creating 4 quality chances and putting as many of those away as we can. Focus heavily on the build, focus heavily on the press. We see our job as a coaching staff is, can we provide a model for them to break into the final third through their build, and then can some of their individual brilliance take over with some ideas from the model, of course. But attacking, very possession based. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but we average high 60s possession for most of our games. Outside, I'd say 2 of them we were in the high 60s in possession. Look to move the ball around. It's. But having said that, it's not just possession for possession's sake. It's possession for what the opponents are giving us. If they're pressing 7 high, well, we're going to bypass the press and go long in the space in behind. But if they're playing more in a mid block, you might see our center backs play 10, 15, 20 passes back and forth to each other to try to start pulling those forward and the attacking mids out of position so we can find that space behind the first line. But it's really it's the decision making is up to the girls, and it's hard. It's not an easy thing to teach and prep. And I think our coaching staff does a great job. I'll exclude myself from that. I mean, I think the head coach and the other assistant do a fantastic job of assisting the girls to be able to recognize those cues and triggers and make the appropriate decisions. I think if you sit in a few of our meetings, you'll say, man, this is a really structured style of play. It is and it isn't. It is very structured, but what we talked about already, you find freedom through that discipline. And so when you find yourself in these situations, there's 4 or 5 decisions you can make. You choose that decision. Doesn't mean you can go rogue and start taking 10 players on, but you're in a situation, you have the power to make that decision. And if you hear us coaching on the sideline, very, very, very rarely are we ever coaching the player on the ball. It's always the players off the ball that kind of help the team create those situations and those environments for the player on the ball to recognize the cues and triggers and make decisions.
And I think, again, that's a bit of a reflection point that I've had recently is functionality versus freedom and how that plays a piece in terms of that being very structured, very rigid, but be very fluid in terms of allowing those aspects to come out in terms of those principles that you'd like to see across your team.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think you can look at that structure versus fluidity not only on decision making, but also positionally. Like, I would say we start out rather structured, but our players have the freedom to move very fluidly across positions. But it has to be a recognition of what's happening. It can't just be Luca at the left back. I feel like taking a run at attacking mid. It has to be an understanding within the team itself that says, okay, I see Luca going high now. I'm going to shift here. And that takes a lot of time.
Absolutely.
I mean, again, credit to the rest of the coaching staff. They do a fantastic job.
And you're definitely included in there, mate, even if you have excluded yourself.
Appreciate you.
Well, mate, it has been an absolute unreal hour and 42 minutes talking to you about the insights of the goalkeeping and the way that the conversations have flowed and really then delved into real topic areas and taken so much away from every timestamp that I put on there has truly been incredible, and I really appreciate this. But not to cut into your time too much more, but to finish on a quick fire, as I do with every coach, if that's okay.
Yeah, we'll have at it. Put me in the hot seat.
Norries, love that. If you had to have someone describe you in 3 words, what 3 words would they be?
Loyal, hardworking, and compassionate.
Top 3 words for sure, which are really important. What is your favorite meal?
I'm a fan of a burrito. I think you can make it in anything you want. You want a breakfast burrito? Cool. You want something more traditionally? Fantastic. I think it's the versatility is what is appealing.
Love that. What is your most favorite film?
The first one that popped in my head when you said it was The Departed.
Great film.
Big fan of that one. The dips and turns, the stylistic aspects of it. I'm a big fan.
Absolutely. What is your favorite TV series?
Not much of a TV person. I will say, if I had to pick one, I enjoy dark comedies. I'm a big fan of Always Sunny in Philadelphia.
I've heard good things about that show. Very interesting. If you could move to any country to coach, where would it be?
I could move to any country to coach. I would love Japan.
Very interesting.
Love it. And I think the technical prowess and their ability to make, from a soccer standpoint, from a decision-making standpoint, I love the culture. I think it's fantastic. And so that's probably what I'd pick.
Definitely a place that I want to go and experience.
I'd have to learn some language. I have to learn some language skills, but
definitely a great place. If you could spend a day with any coach or manager, who would it be?
There's so many. I mean, I could say Unai Emery. I could say
top choice.
Bielsa. I think. I mean, you look at the top 3 right now, and not league standing right now, but in my opinion, obviously at Klopp, Pep, and Arteta, I think all of them would be fantastic to sit down and have a meal with and kind of pick their brains about. I think all 5 of those coaches view things very differently, and how they manage players, the game, the situation. And I think I would talk about masterclass. That
There's real. I think there's a business scope there for sure. Who was or is your role model?
I mean, I think the easiest answer many times is the correct answer. I would say my father, growing up, I looked up to him quite a bit with his actions and how he carried himself during positive times and also not so positive times.
I love a personal one for sure. If I went back to younger Mark with all the experience, the knowledge, the insights he has now, and I posed option A in front of him of being a full-time professional player, having a great career without coaching though, and option B of a professional coaching career, coaching at any level that he wanted, whether it's US national team, any of the Premier League teams, anywhere in the coaching world, but without playing, what would he choose?
A young Mark, if I was promised to be able to have the skills to do it and be able to maintain the healthy, be able to be injury free, I'd probably pick the playing.
Good choice, good choice. What is your number one top tip for any coach?
Be yourself. Growth mindset. Be yourself. Understand who you are and constantly try to grow.
Love that for sure. If you could take any job in the world of choice, whether it's coaching or any other job, what would it be?
It's a funny thing. My friend circle and my family, we have a bit of a joke. A dream job of mine outside of coaching would be a voice actor.
Very cool.
I find it so fascinating what they do and whatnot. So, but as outside of coaching, it'd be that. But inside of coaching, I would say it's what I'm doing right now.
Love that. I love that one for sure. If you could recommend one book, what would it be?
Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss.
Good choice. Good choice. I'll look into that one for sure. What are your 3 non-negotiables?
It's going to be respect, intentionality. Well, I've changed that to purpose. Respect, purpose, and focus on relationships. I'm not sure what word that would be right now, though.
3 good choices for sure. What does reflection mean to you?
I think it's having the tough conversations with yourself. I think it's tough doesn't necessarily mean negative. Tough can also be positive. Tough. I mean, you might have negative self-talk on a regular basis, but to give yourself the grace and the respect that you've done something that was actual quality. That I think that's part of the reflective process as well. I think too many times we don't see that side of it, and we see, well, it was bad. How can it be better? And that's super important to do because that means you're growing. But I think there also has to be the aspect of self-love as far as I've done what I could in this moment, and that moment, that's all I could do right there. So going forward in future moments, how can I make it better though?
I love that piece for sure. I think that's such one of the best reflection pieces that I've had for that answer, which is certainly up there. And a final one, what is one thing you enjoy most about coaching?
The ability to positively mentor and develop individuals to help them achieve more than they thought was possible.
And what a fantastic way to finish almost 2 hours spent with you, which I do really appreciate. And, it was early lunchtime. Now it's almost middle of the day from the time that we spent together. But honestly, I do really appreciate it. And honestly, the amount of notes, timestamps that I've taken away and the time that I'm going to spend mulling on this and taking back is really going to be so beneficial. And every time that you spoke and every time that I thought of a timestamp, I'm thinking, wow, how lucky are the people who are going to sit and listen to this, because I think this is such a top quality episode. But I really do appreciate it, Mark, and it's been a wonderful insight. And as I said at the start, it's great to put a face to a name and finally meet each other.
I appreciate you, and I appreciate your flattery. And again, I appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation, because it's a two-way street.
Such a pleasure. Well, take care. I'll get in touch with you soon, and really appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Awesome. You as well, Luca. Thank you very much.
Cheers, Mark. Thank you.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Bye.
2 individuals that believed in me and wanted the best for me as well. So I think you always need someone in your corner that sees your worth as an individual first, and not just what you can bring to the table. And then can really help facilitate you to achieve your goals.